Welcome to the Create the Life You Want podcast, where we break down the journey of people just like you going from dream to ownership in business acquisitions, franchises, and startups. I'm your host, Jeremy Ames. Today's episode is brought to you ad-free by Guidant Financial. Guidant is America's leading company helping aspiring entrepreneurs use retirement funds to buy or start businesses. If you're committed to buying or starting a business, you can find out more about your funding options by going to www.guidantfinancial.com. That's Guidant financial.com. Now, let's get started with the show. Welcome, everyone, to the Create the Life You Want podcast. Today, I am joined by Kathryn and Phil Ernst. And about 13 years ago, they started a bakery and cafe that has now expanded into a couple of locations and a facility where they manufacture baked goods. And I believe there's a gluten-free story behind this, but I'm excited to dig in and find the details about this. But Kathryn and Phil, thanks so much for joining us today.
Great. Well, thanks for having us. Appreciate it.
Well, the question I always like to start with is, did you always know you wanted to be a business owner, or at what point did it enter your head that, hey, this might be something that I want to do?
I think it was always part of my personality and my husband's personality. We met in college. So, we started our careers together, and we always kind of wanted to build some type of business, and we never really knew what it was going to be. But every single time we talked about something, it always had some sort of food connection to it. So
there's been a shared love of food. How many years have you been talking about the idea of starting a business together?
Well, we met in 1984, so probably since then.
For a while.
Yeah, for a while.
That was a minute ago.
Yeah, just a minute ago.
What did you do in between here and then? Is this the first business that you have started together, the bakery and cafe?
Yes. So we met in college, we got married, and then, I have a degree in accounting and my husband has a degree in finance. And so we had, careers in business. And so I worked in accounting and that type of stuff. He worked in finance and baking. And then we started having kids, and I stayed home for 15 years with that and, continued doing lots of cooking and baking for our kids. And then went back to work and realized that kind of the connection to the food was at that point where we realized that, I had a lot of food allergies. So it was something that was really important. And I felt like we were struggling a lot as a family because our kids were young. We were taking them to hockey games and, you're out and about, and there was just nothing to eat for me because I had so many restrictions. And so once things calmed down a little bit, we realized that there was something that I probably could share with other people. So I did a lot of experimenting, and I did a lot of testing in my kitchen, kind of became a crazy person. And then we found a spot and we said, let's just take a shot. We really tried hard to come up with a business that wasn't related to food because we know how risky it is. We know how challenging the food business can be, regardless of how you go about that, whether it's manufacturing, retail, whatever you end up doing. It's a tough business. But I don't really know what business isn't tough. So we just kind of said, you know what, this just seems to be part of who we are as a couple and as a family. And so we took that risk and went into the food business.
Love that.
Despite a lot of people saying don't do it.
Yeah, a lot of people telling you it's a bad idea. So you went from banking to baking. You got to say that really slow to make sure you get the end.
The books. Yeah.
And so, Kathryn, what I love about your story is this sounds like it was driven by this gap that you felt for yourself, trying to find. Can you talk a little bit about some of the restrictions? It sounds like celiacs or some form of gluten might be one of those things, but were there other things too that you were dealing with?
So there were top 8 allergies. Now there's top 9. So a lot of those allergens that are established or determined by the government, really, they put this list of top 9 allergies together. And that means that if you're going to have an allergen to a food, here's the significant number of people in the country that kind of react to these items. And so gluten was one of them. And it was very difficult for us when we were raising our kids and running to hockey games, as I said, to just find a place where I could just stop and grab something to eat. And it was just really difficult. There was always, lots of planning ahead and making sure I either had something to come with me or, running home and making sure the crock pot was going. It was just another level of complication. And it just wasn't easy to go to a place and feel like I could really securely eat something. So what happened was I started experimenting, and I realized that I had taken gluten out of my diet because it was just so challenging for me to really be healthy. And there was nothing in the market that really spoke to me because I'm a scratch cook. I cook stuff from scratch all the time. And at the time, only the things that were available to me were box mixes or frozen food. And it just wasn't the things that I wanted to feed myself. And so that's kind of how we developed this business, was really saying, I can't be the only person out there that is struggling to find
Yeah.
something good and healthy and safe to eat. So there's got to be other people out there like me. So I'm going to share what I have with them.
So you were desiring a place that you could go to that meant you didn't have to cook it. You could take the family and you didn't have to be the weird one that's asking for 75 modifications. And
Correct. Yeah, and
yeah,
also just having a choice, right? Like, because we eat out often enough, and there's just not always a lot of choice. Even today, there's just not as much choice as you'd like. I was, if you go to fine dining, for example, they're very accommodating, but that's just not your normal day-to-day eating, right? You're not going to fine dining
yeah.
because you don't have a chef that's there that's going to make something special for you if they find the need that they can do that. But, just every day-to-day stuff, being able to run in and grab, a chicken pot pie for dinner, and I could throw it in the oven and everybody's going to be super happy with it. That's what we provide, because that's where I feel like they want to have meals around the table. They want to go out to eat as a family. And, it's frustrating and hard and takes a lot of work, in addition to being able to cook something, to also restrict yourself by certain ingredients or flavors or textures or tastes that are going to meet everybody's needs. And that's kind of where we've come in, to be able to share our knowledge of food and our knowledge of good cooking and being able to provide that for, our community.
Great. So it sounds like the seed had been germinating in your mind for a while. At what point do you feel like was the pivot point where you and Phil decided this is going to be a business now?
So I was working a part-time job, and I just realized that there was more to what I wanted to do than what I was doing this part-time job. So we started, I'd done a lot of experimenting for a year, and I had discovered or created a flour mix that I was really happy with, and that I was constantly taking my family recipes and mixing them up with this new flour mix that would make them gluten-free and address all the other allergens as I was baking, and it was being really successful. And so we said, you know what, I think it's time for us to take this leap and try and find a space that is going to give us an outlet to be able to share this with others. And so we started, it was really more of I think it's time to, let's take this risk. We said, okay, we've got some money that we're going to put aside and we're going to take this risk and let's see what we can find. So we started looking to buy a restaurant or whatever, but we did find this space that was not too far from our home, that kind of provided a lot of the basics that we needed. It was a second generation restaurant space. And we and it wasn't too far from home because my daughter at the time was only 11, so I still needed to be a mom. And
Yep.
so it was not too far from home. It met a lot of the needs that we needed. It wasn't too big of a space. It kind of did all the little things we could do to quietly make our way into a business.
Got it. And how long did it take you to get all that set up? Did you quit your part-time job? I mean, walk us through some of the details of the journey when you think, hey, I think I want to give this a go. Then what happened?
So I think I continued working for a little bit with the part-time job and then gave notice and, left maybe, I don't know, a few weeks before we were actually incorporating. And then from the time we incorporated in August, we actually opened up the end of December. So there was a lot of, over the springtime of 2011, there was a lot of background stuff going on to kind of get ourselves ready to start construction. And we had to find contractors. We had to understand what I had to do with the town, what the restrictions were. Building a food business was all new to me. I didn't know any if it was starting from scratch on everything. So we were just, I had to give myself enough time to be able to kind of create all those needs or create all those answers. So, and then we were able to open the last day of December of 2011. So
How did you figure it all out? I mean, you had never done any of this
perseverance, I'll
before
tell
other
you.
than some of the recipes.
Well, I mean, being a business person, you learn from business that you've just got to be methodical, right? And so, and I knew enough about food, and I had worked for a law firm where I was kind of the CFO there, so under I had a lot of information about we had moved the company. So there were things, I know it seems so silly, but there were things that we had done to kind of build that new office space that allowed me to kind of have that in my wheelhouses to some of the things that, oh yeah, I got to make sure I take care of the phone. I got to make sure I take care of the internet. No, those basic things. And then as far as the design is concerned of the restaurant, I'm very lucky because my brother is an architect. So he helped with that first design. And then, we had a contractor that we had worked with some work on our own home, and he also did some commercial stuff. So we went to him, and he was very, um, easy to work with and very patient with us and helped us walk through all the different bits and pieces we needed for that first build out. So, we had a lot of people that we knew that we kind of just kept picking everybody's brains, and we had a great attorney that got us started to help us on that part of it. We had, our landlord was very accommodating to us. So we had just a lot of people in our corner to make it successful and a lot of perseverance. I will say that, like,
Yeah.
I got to get here. So, okay, well, how do I get there? There's a lot of research and a lot of just getting to yes in some regard.
Well, two finance professionals, I'm curious to ask this because it's one of the gaps I often see with new business owners is how they think about creating the projections and expectations for what their business is going to do. So walk us through when you were concepting this idea, what did you build out and where were your assumptions off, both
Okay,
good and bad?
I'm going to let you have Phil talk to that because there was a lot of, basic accounting stuff that we did and basic counts. So he's going to talk to that part of it.
So I'll flip it over this way. So the interesting part was I had worked with a lot of entrepreneurial startup companies, and so I spent my whole career in banking that was banking those companies, and a lot of it was the formation. So I was involved in a lot of the startup classes to try to understand how startups were to go about it. And I reached out to my network of accountants and lawyers and leasing companies and other bankers, and we started to kind of ask the fundamental question. Here's a space we know nothing about: setting up a restaurant, setting up a cafe, understanding how many cups of coffee are people going to buy in a given morning, how many breakfast sandwiches are people going to procure, what is this going to look like, is this the right plaza to do it in? And the only thing I could think of, and it was kind of validated by a couple of my colleagues, it was, well, why don't you sit in the parking lot at 7 a.m. and count the cars coming in? And why don't you do that at 10 a.m.? And why don't you do it on a Saturday and a Sunday? So we just started to put that together and said, there's about this many cars, there's this type of activity. And we just started to kind of do a very bottoms up approach to the financial model, not from we're going to do $1 million in the first year. It was how many cups of coffee, how many sandwiches, how much traffic flow might come in. Would people spend $5 or $7 per ticket? And then multiply that out and then roll it from there. And we started to build that model. And I'll say, how good were we? We weren't. We had no idea. And I think part of that was, I think we probably did more than what we were projecting. And a lot of that was everything was evolving. So we started with, a small product offering of baked goods with the idea that, hey, we needed to make more than just baked goods. We needed to make something of substance. As Kathryn said earlier, I just want to go get something to eat. Well, what is it that you want? Well, I want a sandwich, and I want breakfast, and I want lunch, and I want salads and soups, and I want bowls. And so all of a sudden stuff just started to evolve almost within a few months of starting, to a point where that budget that we had originally contemplated had to get revised and reiterated. And because it was a relatively small investment in the very beginning, we could iterate that model actively. And so that's what we
Yeah.
just kept doing. And we just wanted to make sure we were charging the right amount of the right price, hiring the right people to be able to execute on the plan.
Yeah. Going into second gen space is a huge savings for most restaurant type concepts, right? Because so much of the cost is in the TIs of meeting code for
Right.
the kind of equipment you need. I'm curious, when you started it and you get into the second gen space, what were you expecting the investment to be to get this thing off the ground, both in terms of initial capital and then how long you were going to need to operate it in the red before it would get profitable, and what actually ended up being true?
Oh, that harkens back a long time ago, probably 100 years, but I know it's only been 13. I We kind of initially thought that the build out would be somewhere in the 50 to 100,000 range to get it going. It was a rather modest build out. We weren't building a full on kitchen with a massive line. Um, the bakery side really just needed ovens to be able to execute. So we had a rather modest approach to that 50 to 100. And we figured it would take somewhere in that 6 to 9 months or so to get the community to welcome us, to generate enough consistent customer base and repeat customer traction. So we just built it off of that. And, we didn't know about vendor relations at that moment. We had to start from scratch with every mainline distributor and all the small little guys to figure out how we are going to be able to get them to provide us some degree of credit. Even 15 days or 30 days was an outlier. It was really 15 days, and some of them were, we're going to deliver next week, and you just have to have a check ready for us. So we had to
Yeah.
learn all of those things, but it was all, from our standpoint, it was, sometime in that first year, it should have been self generating and self cash flowing to a point where we didn't have to rely on it. And I still kept
Well,
my day job. So I
yeah.
had not left the banking world. This was Kathryn's baby, and it was something that we were going to be focused on and build and doing it right in the beginning to be able to build it for the future.
Got it. So you had a way that you were supplementing some income in the short run, but you said should have been profitable within this time period. So I'm curious, you had your assumptions coming in. What actually ended up being true? What did you learn about the difference between what you thought was going to happen and what actually happened?
I mean, still have Phil talk to that
Yeah.
because I think that the financial side of it was really more his forte.
I think, we had enough cash behind us to do what we needed to do, that during that first year, we got to, I would argue, where we wanted to be cash flow wise. What was interesting is we were learning more about this because of what we had created. We weren't just another pizza shop. We weren't just another deli. We weren't just another bakery. We had this unique product offering. And what we opened in December, and what we had learned by June or July was everybody was thinking about Thanksgiving. And we said, well, what's unique about Thanksgiving? And if you look around your dinner plate, it was the
Everything has
bird.
gluten.
Everything has gluten. The mashed potatoes have dairy. We were, Kathryn, when we started this, it was gluten and dairy free for the most part. We would add a piece of cheese to something if somebody wanted it, but by and large, everything we were creating was dairy free. So whether that's your stuffing or your mashed potatoes, your gravy is a roux, and that's made with some type of wheat. And so all of a sudden, it's like we had to kind of create it, and everybody was asking us, well, what are you going to do for Thanksgiving? And it's like, I don't know. What do you guys want? Well, we want pies, and we want this, and we want this, and we want that. And so at that moment, we're like, well, we're doing well enough, but I don't know that we're staffed appropriately. I don't know that we have enough storage space and enough packaging space to be able to accommodate all of this. And so we had to kind of look at that. And that was part of the iteration to say, well, we're going to forego kind of this profitability thing because we have enough capital to do this, that we're going to kind of kick that can down the road for the greater good, which was we needed to deliver on these things and to provide their holidays something that they have been striving to get that they can't find anywhere else. And
Love
so
that. So you
we,
created this spot in your community for people like Kathryn to go that have some of these allergies, and these customers were calling out to you and saying, we need your help when it comes up to these meaningful events. And so you were seeing an opportunity to expand the business outside of just a location-based approach to also, what was it, delivery? Was it pickup? Was it shipped
yeah,
goods? I mean, how did you think about that from the get-go?
it was all come in and pick it up. So we are we're in a small little strip plaza, a grocer, a bank, a Hallmark-like store, a CVS. So that's kind of the plaza that we're in. We were very fortunate. We kind of started with our Instagram and Facebook kind of outreach, and that community just started to swell. We're still blessed with having people drive 45 minutes to an hour away on a daily basis to come see us
Oh,
and to
wow.
have lunch or to have breakfast. And that's just like so unheard of in the restaurant world that people drive just to come see you. So that's where we kind of felt in that very beginning that we need to make sure that we build something that's going to sustain time. And so
Yeah.
we really, I mean, we had long nights, long weekends, really thinking about how are we going to do this so that we do it right and can make it last. Delivery didn't really come about until right around COVID.
Mm-hmm.
We were building everything up and making everything available, but we didn't have drivers to drive things around. We're in a kind of a bedroom community. It would require a long distance drive just to get from one door to the next. And so that piece wasn't something we wanted to take on. So we leveraged, as COVID was hitting, we leveraged the third party outlets. We actually leveraged DoorDash to do that. And so we created that model, and that really that and our customer base telling us you can't go away. You need to be here. We need you more than you realize. And so by the time we were ready to go and as COVID was hitting, we were able to turn on the switch with a DoorDash like instrument and be able to just hit that delivery mechanism pretty hard. And that's
Yeah.
been a really big component of our business. And yes, it's very expensive, as people will say, but we know it's so critically important to the restaurant industry.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you one more question, Phil, before we turn this back to Kathryn, and that's uh, what were you expecting it to cost in totality when you take into account your TIs and your cash flow that you were going to need to manage for that year? And how did you decide how to fund it?
Yeah. So we looked around a lot. We had the cash. We had sufficient amount of cash in our um, in the bank to be able to do what we wanted to do. I had a pretty strong 401k at the time that we could utilize. I was talking to a lot of people. Somehow I ran across Guidant, your company, and caught them, had a early conversation about them. And I said, well, what's the difference between using my 401k to buy IBM stock or a mutual fund versus Twist stock? And so we had that conversation with the folks at Guidant early on, just trying to understand whether or not that was something we were going to do or need to do. And we decided, you know what? It's probably okay. If we can't invest in IBM, or if we think IBM is going to be a great story, why wouldn't we think and put our money in our own pocket and put it into buying Twist stock? So we went down that route. Again, we had planned somewhere in that 50 to 100,000. I think that initial investment was just around that amount or a little bit more through the initial borrowing to get us through to where we wanted to be. And that turned out to be about the right amount of money. We then had to,
Got it.
as we expanded, we tapped into another chunk of that a few years later, but that was methodical and we knew what we were doing. We knew how much we wanted to spend when we did that next investment.
I want to put a pin in that because I want to come back to that. But
Yeah.
sounds like you needed maybe a little over $100,000 to get it off the ground. You had the cash there, but you decided, sounds like you were doing two things to create security for yourself. One was you were staying in your job, Phil, and supporting the business sort of part-time while Kathryn was getting it off the ground. You also saved this cash that you had on the sidelines in case you would need it for whatever reason, either to cover personal expenses or because you needed more investment in the business. And then you had your 401k invest in getting the company started. And that's the Twist Bakery and Cafe, which is the
Right.
Twist stock.
Yeah. Yeah. So I kept my full-time job, stayed full-time, and didn't leave that for many years later. But um, the big thing for me, having done a lot of these companies and having gone through companies that have filed for bankruptcy and all of this, the number one thing that we always talked about through our upbringing is cash is king. You run
Yep.
out, you don't have a business, you don't have any more. So yeah, so leveraging that 401k to do it. Keeping and preserving all of the cash on the side for us was really that rainy day money of something. If we really fell on hard times in the business, to keep that business going, cash was so critically important to have.
Awesome. Thanks, Phil. Get this thing up off the ground. You're starting to get some traction. People are showing their love, not just by showing up at your retail location, but saying, hey, we want you to support some of these events. What happened from there? So you're, I guess now probably early 2012. You've gone through your first holiday season.
Goodness, it's hard to remember this many years back, right? Because it just feels like we've been in this never-ending cycle of growth, really, from 2011 when we started. And it just feels, even though we're around for 13, 14 years, it almost feels like we still feel like we're a startup. It's like every day feels like something new or exciting can happen. And there's so much opportunity. Like within the first few years, we realized we just didn't have enough production space. Like we were really struggling with space. Like it's shocking to know how much money we spent. We were able to generate out of that small little single double oven. We had a small little double oven and a single mixer. And, one walk-in fridge, it was packed full when you would get to those holidays. And so we recognized we didn't have enough room. So we had been looking from probably 2013, honestly, looking for some additional space so we could build a commissary or something like that. And again, it was just market. We weren't able to find anything. We looked really hard with our real estate agent, really trying to find some sort of great space where we could build a really huge commissary. And we just couldn't find it. Well, next door to us had been a yogurt place, a soft serve yogurt, and they were kind of a fly by night. They came in and within a few months they were gone. So the space next door to us had become available. And so we really didn't want to build our commissary there because we felt like it was a retail space. It wasn't really intended for that. But because the real estate market was so tight, we felt like we ended up deciding that this was the right spot. So in 2014, 2015 is when we finally moved in there into this commissary where we really did, at that point, really have to leverage Guidant to give us some additional funds from our 401k because that was a much bigger build out. And then from there, we knew we felt like we were building this commissary so we could build additional locations because we knew there was just so much demand that this one small little space wasn't going to be able to serve the community. We felt there's so many people that really could use our services. And a lot of people are like, can you please go here? Can you please go here? Can you please go here? So first step was really building that commissary. And then after that, we started looking for another facility that we could have another retail space, not directly around us. But again, we were able to find another second generation space and we're able to build that out to another cafe. So now we have those two cafes, the commissary build out, and fast forward to today, we're still looking for another spot.
The commissary model was more like you were building this hub. So is the idea that you were going to do a lot of the baked goods out of there, and as you had other locations, you'd ship them to some of those locations and then do some stuff on site?
Yes, and that's exactly what happens. So for example, we have all the big equipment in our commissary. So we're able to make a big 140 quart mixer full of chocolate chip cookie dough, for example. And then we have a piece of equipment that portions that chocolate chip cookie dough. So then we freeze that chocolate chip cookie dough because you can make chocolate chip cookie dough raw, freeze it, and you're good to go. And then every morning we just bake it off. So we allow consistency. We have one point of entry for all of the ingredients so we can have real good quality control because we need to control the ingredients inside. What the restaurants do on their own is they do make things like, any vegetable component they're able to do. So they'll roast their own peppers. They'll do things like that to get prepped for the day. But if it's big, some of the bigger things, we make them at the commissary. So there's a kind of a combination of things that are being done, some at the restaurant level, some at the commissary level, depending on the actual product we're talking about. But on the baked goods side, all the products are, if you're getting a cupcake from our place, it's actually being made in the commissary. And then we do freeze them for transport because they don't get damaged that way. So, and then we just make those very, very frequently throughout the week and throughout the month, and then just constantly rotate that through each location.
So the commissary sounds like by far the most expensive part of what you did because now you're building out kitchen equipment from scratch, meaning you
Yes,
got to bring it all in. And you're talking about a lot of different types of specialized equipment for doing stuff in batches. So what was
yes.
the size of that investment relative to what you had done, 3 or 4 years earlier to get the business kicked off?
So that one was much more expensive because we had to actually the health department requires you to build in floor drains and things like that. So we had to do a lot of digging into that facility. So remember that old movie Holes? Like there's holes everywhere. That's what that space looked like before they poured the concrete again. So much more involved for sure. Lots more electrical, lots more plumbing, lots more expensive equipment. So that one was definitely more expensive. And and then what we progress, we're very typical of this in our business is that we take baby steps. So we'll start with what we absolutely need to have in order to get this to work. And then as we build and, we have more sales behind us and things like that, we're able to use our cash reserves to be able to buy some things that doesn't require us to put any more long-term investment into it. So we kind of look at that from a standpoint of need and what we're able to pay for with just our cash reserves, so in order to keep the business running and growing.
How does the business vary in terms of the volatility throughout the year and like how much of a spike are you getting during these holidays? Is it just insane? Like, you have to bring in extra people seasonally to deal with the demand?
So we do bring, so our cafe has teenagers that work, so a lot of times we'll have them do extra work for us during the fall season. But we work really, I mean, honestly, we start talking about Thanksgiving the second that Thanksgiving's over because you're already planning ahead, right? You're like, so right now, I think, the bakery team has to hand press 1,500 pie shells. So in order for us to do that, so they'll break it down and they'll do it that way. But we are over the summer literally getting ready for Thanksgiving because we can make an apple pie and it's all the components are put together and we'll freeze it in September and then we'll bake it for you in November. But it's perfectly great because it does have a great when it's raw and not done anything to it, we can then bake it for you and it's a fresh, delicious pie. So there's a lot of production and planning that goes into being able to execute on those holidays. And we go from one holiday to another, right? But that was one of the reasons why we felt like the food part of the business was so important, was because people can't just live on bakery items alone, and they do need a food component to bring them in on a regular basis. So thankfully, we've been around a while. We have really good, historical records of what our sales were before, what we want to be able to grow the company. So we generally will say that one restaurant is probably slower in January and then a couple months in the summer. Another restaurant will be still slow in January, but maybe a little bit busier in the summer because of their location. So it just depends on, location specific. But we plan for that with our team and we'll say, okay, January is a great time for you to take some vacation time. So how about that? And then, we do bring in extra hands over the summer, or when you get in January and you're kind of slow, for example, you're like, okay, what can we be doing in advance in January to get us ready for Valentine's Day, and then again Mother's Day that comes in, and Easter, depending on when Easter falls. So you're trying to kind of really think a month or a couple months ahead to these next ones, and trying to say sometime that it's slower in January. You're going to be doing R&D. You're going to be getting ready for the next holiday. So trying to keep your staff fully employed during those time frames as much as you can. So you look
Yeah.
at it from all different angles.
Yeah, seasonality can be tough. Can you help us understand what that first Thanksgiving in 2011 looked like versus Thanksgiving 2024 or Thanksgiving 2023?
Well, Thanksgiving 2011, well, I mean, I know I have, or 2012 actually, I know I have the records, but it was like, oh, we made 36 pies or something like that, and not compared to right now, we do I mean, I don't know what it's going to be this year, 1,500 pies or something just for pies. And so it has significantly increased, but it's like a completely different business from what it was in 2011 compared to what it is today. And that's all because we've taken baby steps along the way. Not, I don't think Phil and I have talked about this before about, these companies that blow up overnight. Like, I don't know how you function with that because it's just so overwhelming. So for us, it's just been a constant growth every year, which is terrific, but I'm glad for that. I think, a smaller growth over a longer period of time has helped us to be successful and be able to say, if in 2011 you had said to me, oh, in 2023, you're going to make 1,500 pies, and you're going to go, oh my God, how are we going to ever do that? Whereas now it's so doable because it's something that we've built into the model. So it's something we've been able to grow up to as compared to just being thrown into.
I think to that point, we end up looking at the investor community, and we look at we have very patient investors in Twist. So we look in the mirror and we say, okay, so are we okay where we are? And the answer is yes, keep going. But I think if we had outside capital, venture or angel or the otherwise, there's a return on that investment and a time cycle for that investment. And 13 years may be way too long. They would have wanted to have seen something completely different. So since we're bankrolling this, it's our baby and what we're trying to do, at some point, bigger capital, growth expansion may make sense, because we won't rule it out. We just want to make sure that we get all of the infrastructure things done correctly along the way. And, I think, you had asked the question on how did Thanksgiving or the Q4, what was the Q4 effect? We are retail. And as I mentioned earlier, we didn't really think about Thanksgiving or the Q4 impact when we started putting our plans together. We didn't realize that we were going to see, instead of it being a quarter of the business happening in each quarter for the 100% for the year, it was a 40% number in Q4. And you're like, holy moly, how are we going to be able to handle that next year? 40%, we're looking at a 25% growth next year. And it's how are you going to do 40% of that in Q4? So that really, I think that component of the plan that evolved. That's something that we didn't really see to the favorable side.
I also want to say one other part of it that when we're talking about the planning is we know the number of staff members we have and the number of hours we have to work with. And so we make menu decisions based on that a lot of times. We like to have variety. We like to have a wealth of opportunity for guests to come in, but we also know there's only so much that we can handle. So we want to make sure that we are respecting our team and not killing them and not asking them to do 20 hours of overtime, which, you don't end up with staff members that stay with you as long as they have stayed with us if you overwork them. So it's a big balancing act between all of those demands, which is true of any entrepreneur. No matter what your topic is, it's going to be the same topic. You're going to have to balance it all out and make some really hard business decisions, sometimes that you don't even realize are part of the equation. So the menu choices, the quantities of which we can do, and we're willing to sell, like, say, for example, we know that we can get an oven filled with so many pies. We're going to okay, well, we have enough hours to do 2 or 3 rounds of pies. That particular pie, we're going to max out at this particular number because that's all we can achieve. So we really do that balancing act. It's not an unlimited amount of opportunity to buy that particular pie because we can't execute on it. We make promises to our guests. We want to make sure that we're actually able to execute on that promise.
Yeah, a couple things that I'm hearing that sound really great. One is this idea of patient investors, which resonates for me in your case because you decided to use retirement funds to invest in this. So in essence, you became your own angel investor, but using funds that are designed to generate a long-term return, not something that needs to be short-term, which is great. I'm curious, as you talk about the seasonality piece, it sounds like it's forced you to innovate in different ways, like even how you're thinking about using multiple months leading up to Thanksgiving to do this sort of prep and freezing of things. What are there any other ways that you have evened out the seasonality in your business in a way that allows you to keep that sort of full-time team busy and engaged throughout the year?
So we do that through, menu selection as well. Like, so for example, we rotate our menu on a regular basis. So we are a seasonal company to begin with. Like, that's one of our promises is that we're going to provide you seasonal food. So for example, we're in New England. So pumpkin is a thing. And so, by the middle of August to the last week of August, everybody's looking for something pumpkin. So we know that we have to bring pumpkin in. But we also know that the minute that Thanksgiving is over, nobody wants pumpkin anymore. So,
Yeah.
we bring the seasonality not only to the particular holidays, but to the seasons. So we have guests that are looking forward to this pumpkin coming in September, and then there's apple season, so you've got to bring your apple cider donut muffins in. So we try and do that to keep people interested and keep them coming back. And then we also decide that we're going to change our menu a couple of times a year, again, to bring in some excitement to provide some reason for people to keep coming back, because there's, you could do one menu for the whole year and you're like, oh yeah, when I go to Twist, I can always get this. But we want it to be, well, oh, what am I going to find today? What exciting thing am I going to find today? And specifically because our consumer base, they just don't have the varieties that they're looking for when they go out to eat. They're limited, so much limited. And so we want to create abundance for them. And so by changing this menu on a regular basis to give them an opportunity to have something new and exciting just for them really goes to the core of who we are as a company. We're constantly thinking about our guests, for sure.
And how much of that is driven off just the seasonal changes? You come back to the same things versus literally you're driving R&D and you're saying Kathryn's the chef's going in there and saying, okay, I want to figure out how to make two new things that no one's ever heard of and make them really great.
Well, we do that because I am a foodie at heart. And, when I travel, I try new things or I see new things and I watch what other people are doing and I follow social trends and I, just keep myself going all the time to see what is out there and what I would like to try next. And we do, over the years, my goodness, we've grown. So we have different people that have worked for us now, whereas we started in 2011 with one pastry chef and that was it. And I knew I couldn't do it all myself. And then we had a savory chef, but now we have, 70 people that work for us. And of that team, that corporate team, we have someone who specializes in R&D, and that's what they do. And they, I'll say, I'd like to try this. And they're like, okay, let me get that to going. And I start them with a recipe. So there's always this ongoing R&D. And we do, actually right now, we're working really hard at trying to quantify what we're spending on that so we can have a better handle on it and really kind of put that into a better budgetary sense. Because when you change a menu, for example, there's 6 people that are involved in there. Everybody's got to learn the menu. So everybody's got to make it. So there's a lot of expense that's involved in that. So, I would say, we focus on R&D in January, we focus on R&D at some point in the summer. And then once we get our finalized menus done for the fall, we can put a little bit more R&D in there for the springtime, but it's very limited as to what you can do. So you have to be really focused on what you want to have done. And then I'll do some stuff at home to try and see if I want to bring it to the restaurant or not, kind of eliminate things on my own before I start to bring it into the bakehouse or with the chefs.
Well, you've been at this for 13 years, Kathryn. How has your life changed? And I'm not just talking about the external components of it, but how has it changed for you being a business owner?
So I think that, they talk about entrepreneurship. It's like a big buzzword, but I mean, I think it's our life now. I mean, I think that there's no distinction between me as a person and me as my business. It's just who we are as a family. Like, we own a company and we talk about the company all the time and we make decisions based on the company to the annoyance of my children on occasion. But, it's just who we are. Like, I love the business. I love the game of business. I really do. Like, it's like, I'm not a game player. Don't ask me to put a puzzle together, but I love the game of business. And I think it just really, motivates me and excites me. And Phil's in the same position where we love to see the winning that we've achieved and we take all of the losses personally and grow from them. So I don't think there's any distinction between, us as a couple and us as a business owner. We try to separate it, but it's tough. But I will say that it's been an incredible growth opportunity for me just personally. Like, if I look back to who I was in 2011 when we started this business and where I am today, just as a leader running a company this size, it's exciting to see. And I just keep going. Like, how else can I be a better leader? What else can I do to make it a better place to work? And all those things are very exciting for me. So it's that game business that just really
Yeah.
motivates me.
Well, contrast it for us because you said you were a CFO at this law company, right? So you've been
Yep.
in a leadership position in a company.
Mhm.
What's been different about this that's forced you to grow as a person versus when you were, a high level manager or executive at in a corporate role?
So, I didn't have a lot of people reporting to me or any people reporting to me. It was a small 7-person law firm. So, having all these people report to you and you feel personally committed to their growth and personally committed to the fact that they depend on these paychecks to grow their own personal families, like that is a different position. And I want to be a leader that they find motivating. And I always said, even when we were in 2011 and starting it, if we have these young people that this is the first or second job that they have, I want them to leave at some point and say when they're in their 40s, oh my God, I learned that at Twist. I remember when I learned that at Twist. That's important to me. I think even my sister said her first job was working at McDonald's, and here she is, in her mid 60s and saying, I remember when I got that at McDonald's. I learned this particular thing at McDonald's because it really made a difference. And that's where I want to be. I want to be a company that does that for people. So constantly improving my leadership. I look to outside. I look to a lot of, internal learning, that type of stuff to make it a better place for people.
And you said when you started the business, your youngest was 11, which means you probably had one or more older kids. I'm curious, how have they perceived the business? How have they seen the change in you and the family relative to becoming an entrepreneurial family?
Well, I think it's exciting as a family. We're a close family. I think my parents have worked in the business. Like everybody has done their fair share working for our company. You know what I mean? So, now like we have a proprietary flour mix that I developed, and it used to be when it was mixed, like I would mix it, my husband would mix it, my mother would mix it. We'd all have the mix, and then now we have it developed for us by a manufacturer, so it comes in by the truckload. But everybody's had their hands in it. They all come at Christmas and help. But now that my kids are older and they have their own careers, they don't they're not in it on a day-to-day basis. They've all worked for the company at some point, but I think they're super proud of where their parents have come. I mean, it's exciting for them and proud for them to know that they have parents that have taken something from nothing and built it into something pretty successful. And I think they're proud of that fact, and so, and I think they use it as a motivator for themselves to say, where can I take my career?
Yeah, love that.
Yeah.
Kathryn, this proprietary flour blend, is it coming to a grocery store near any of us anytime soon? Because I have still not tried a gluten-free flour that I thought didn't taste, like
Didn't taste
anywhere
good.
near a good
So
thing.
there you go. There's another growth opportunity for us, right? Like grocery is definitely an opportunity. That's something we're talking about, but it's just another business line. The restaurant business is a very busy business, very dynamic, and there's not a ton of margins involved, so you have to run things pretty lean. And so, being able to take the time aside to now build another business, which really that would be, is not
Yeah.
something we've been able to execute yet. So we do sell our flour, we sell our pancake mix, and we sell some of our other proprietary things in our restaurants. And we are considering doing some e-com, which might be a great way for us to kind of get involved, get started into the grocery side, but it's not something that we've actually executed on at this point, unfortunately.
Let's talk about where you want to take the company. I mean, have you and Phil talked about how you want to think about retirement, how you think about the growth of the company over the next 5 to 10 years? Like, what's on the horizon, and how are you thinking about your life and where this business intersects?
So I think, I'm 61, Phil's 62. So we have a good 10 years left, of being able to build this company. And so there's a lot that can happen in 10 years. If I think back to what's happened in the past 13 years, it's a little bit more than halfway past, but we have a lot of opportunity to grow. For sure, we're actively looking for another location. And again, I don't know the real estate market is tough, and finding a great second generation place. We've been offered many places that are not second generation. There are many places that are first generation. And, it's out of the question with regard to what we're willing to invest into a business. And so we're looking for a good second generation location, and we've got a couple in the horizon, and we'll see how they go through. But that's the first thing, is to say, again, that baby steps. I've read somewhere at one point that most companies that are successful over a long period of time have somewhere in the 10% growth rate. So that's all. I'm not looking for some big, huge leap into owning 10 locations at any given time, but we do have some strategic thoughts about how we want to open and continue to build it within the Boston region. And that's probably our first, that's really where we're going to go. And I don't think we have an end game we have some end game in mind, but as far as, does it have to be 5 locations? Does it have to be 10 locations within the next 10 years? I think that's not something that we feel we can practically execute on because of some of the restrictions within the market. So we're just taking it one step at a time to see how far we can grow it.
Yeah, I'm hearing you know what your timeline is. You got 10 more good years you want to put into this business before you're ready to sail off into the sunset. And the question
Right.
just becomes like, what are the opportunities that show themselves, and just keep moving the business forward.
Correct.
Yeah, I think that's really the big issue. Is the big piece is you have to build a sustainable business. And so we are cash flowing just fine. We're getting paid. Everybody's getting paid. We've got some great managers. And I think as we get to store number 3, maybe a store number 4, the business is going to have a sufficient amount of cash flow and interest that it's going to sustain itself going forward. We've changed quite a bit, probably in the past 2 years, maybe thank you to COVID, because how it's been a wake up call to just about everybody in the world, in the work environment, how they want to work and how they want to balance family and life. Um, we too have done that over the past couple of years, where we're like, no, it's critically important for us to take some separation away from the business, clear our heads, and know that we can enjoy ourselves as much as we can possibly do. And so I think as we look at the next 5 to 10 years, it's going to be building it better, stronger, as successful as it is today, if not better, and be able to get it into a place where maybe somebody comes along and says, I'd love to, a good operator wants to come in and just move us along and take it over. And that may happen. Or it may just be sustainable to run on its own, and we can just manage from retirement per se, be semi-retired through the thing. Because I can't see myself ever stopping working.
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah,
know what I
sure.
would do with myself. You can only golf so much, I guess, as they say.
Yeah. So yeah, a little more golf in your life, but not planning on full-time
Not
golf.
24/7. Yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, I did work at that law firm, and I remember that guy. He was 75 years old when he was one of the managing partners. And I'm like, aren't you going to retire? And he's like, learned long ago, you never retire. Just keep going. Maybe slow it down a little bit, but don't worry about retiring. So I kind of like that philosophy. Keeps me young.
Love it. I have 2 more questions for you.
Sure.
One question is, the name of our podcast is Create the Life You Want. And I'm
Mm.
curious, when you think over the last 13 years, how have you used this business to create the life that you want?
Well, we certainly have. I mean, I think that it has been at times all encompassing, right? Like when you get to a point, like of course during COVID, when it was you're doing everything you can just to survive, like it becomes everything. And now that we've come out of COVID, it's almost 5 years later, we're able to proudly say that we've built it back up again, and now we can have some freedom. So we can go away if we want to, or we have enough of great people in place that are helping us to grow this business, because we've got this philosophy, as I said earlier, of helping them to grow in their career. Like we really want we're so thrilled with the people that are working for us, and we've worked really hard to get there, but it hasn't been an overnight thing. I will say that we've worked for those 12, 13, 14 years of building the company to get to where we are today, that has given us a little bit more freedom. But there's certainly, that's not an overnight thing that happens in this business, being an entrepreneur, but we've finally gotten it to there. So it's nice.
Yeah, it's interesting as you talk about the timelines, and I'm curious to hear your perspective on this. Has it helped having this business and all these young people in the business with the transition of your kids becoming adults, just from the standpoint of, a lot of people go from having kids at home to then nothing.
Yeah.
And for you, there's still this development in young people that's still happening as part of what you do. So has it made it easier for the kids to sort of fly the nest, or has it, how has
Well, I
that
think,
played out?
I think we grew some really independent people. I mean, we're independent as it is, and we always wanted our children to be able to build a life that they want, with our support as they need it. So I'm really proud of where they've gone and what they've done. And yeah, I do think that it just keeps you young, being in a business with a lot of young people and keeping your mind anxious, or not anxious, your mind moving and trying to grow yet another group. My daughter said to me when she went off to college, she's like, Mom, what are you going to do? I go, I'm going to just take care of my baby. I'm going to take care of my business and grow my business. That's what I'm going to do. Play more game of business. And so I think that it's helped the whole family, to be honest with you. I know it could tear people apart, but it actually hasn't done that for us. It's actually continued to build our relationship between Phil and I even more so. And then the relationship we have with our kids. Like, how many times do you actually get to have a conversation about business with your kids? Like, my daughter's a marketing person, and I can't tell you how many times when she was 13 years old, popping into a conversation that Phil and I were having about work, and she was putting some relevant information into that conversation. And so our children are learning things differently about business and the world in general because they have parents that are in a different position than just working for somebody else.
Love that. Love that. All right, here's your last question, because I promised I would only
Sure.
give you two more. So my last
Okay.
question is, an aspiring business owner comes to you and says,
Yeah.
Kathryn, I love what you've done. I'm inspired by your journey. 13 years into this, what is the best piece of advice you could give me as I head down this path of becoming a business owner for the first time?
Do your homework for sure. Like, make sure. I have actually had a lot of young business people come to me and ask me some of those same questions because, they want to open the food business. They want to do things, and, being a small community as we are in Millis, I think people get to know you personally. So, um, being prepared for business and following, I always think if you follow your dreams and you follow, your internal ideas, and you're smart about it, and you really make sure that you're making smart, conscientious decisions, you're going to be really good at what you do. So I think that the biggest thing I could say is follow your heart. Like, really, I know that sounds kind of woo woo, but it's not. It's intended to be like, I knew that when we were opening this business that we had other people that wanted something that I had. And so I think that when you have that internal belief about yourself and that that failure is not an option, you're going to be able to be very successful. It's a lot of perseverance.
Well, it might be woo-woo coming from some people, Kathryn. I don't translate it as woo-woo coming from you because you've lived
Oh,
it.
thank you. Yeah, I
You
have
took
actually. Yeah.
you took the problem that you saw in the world that you spent so much time figuring out how to solve, and you helped bring that to other people and bring that sort of joy and that flexibility and the feeling of not being so constrained by the
Right.
limitations that are out there. So
Well, thank you.
it's a really beautiful story. And thank you so much for taking the time to share a little bit with us about your journey. Thanks for listening to the Create the Life You Want podcast. If you like what you heard, you can subscribe to future episodes by clicking the subscribe button, you know where. If you're an aspiring business owner, you may also want to subscribe to the Create the Life You Want newsletter for more inspiration and tips delivered to your inbox every week. You can find the link to that in the show notes, as well as on my personal website, jeremyames.com. If you've already decided you want to start or buy a business, consider exploring your financing options by heading to our sponsor's website at www.guidantfinancial.com. That's GUIDANT financial.com. See you in the next episode.